and we realized that the founders meetups were a little more serious, more content filled, and we thought we'd have a more laid back arrangement for people to grab a drink and sit and get to know each other, and that's how the happy hours started. This is the third. The first one, we had Peter from Stewart, is somewhere here, and the second one, we had a gentleman called Matthew Mukalere from BlackRock in the UK, and now Madica reached out to us and said, guys, we're coming to Kampala, we're doing our launch, and we would like to meet your community, and we said we're happy to help you do that.
If you read the reports, Disrupt Africa, Venture Ban, Partech, there are a few statistics here that will ring true. So first of all, majority of the funding going to startups on the continent is going to 4 major countries. So that's Kenya, where I'm from, Nigeria, which is my second home, South Africa, and to Egypt. So that's one thing that we're trying to disrupt, get money out of those 4 countries into other places. And then the next stat that we have is on female CEOs. So 93% of the companies that are funded are actually male-led. So also that's something that we are looking, to encourage more females. You can see her smiling. Yeah, so encouraging more female founders to, venture into this tech space and apply for funding. Then the third thing is fintech. Fintech is the most funded sector on the continent. So we're also keen on, innovations in sectors out of fintech. And then the last stat that we have there is a lot of founders who've been able to raise money are people who've been educated, say, in the States, outside the continent, and then they come back. So also people who have been educated on the continent, like myself. I went to the University of Nairobi. In case you know it. Yeah, so, people who'd be locally educated, also struggle with, raising funds. So also looking to disrupt that. So what will we be offering at Madica? So the first thing we'll be offering is capital. So we'll be giving funds up to 200K, and that will be in the form of a safe note. And then the next thing is a community. So we'll have a community of mentors. I think one of the unique things about Madica is we'll be working with 10 mentors who will be signed onto the fund, and they'll actually get a percentage of the profits that we make from the investments that, from the portfolio companies. And so we'll be working with 10 mentors who have experience on the continent, either, in governance, operations, leading startups, corporates, and all that. So the type of mentors that you will need to advance your startup. We'll also be working with experts on different themes based on the needs that come up with the portfolio companies. We'll also be working with coaches. So these are executive coaches to either coach you as a founder, how do you present yourself, but also how do you present your business. And then there's peer networks. We know entrepreneurship can be very lonely, so we're also very intentional about curating this community of founders who, are walking the journey with you. So, you'll be able to interact with founders who are part of a portfolio from across the continent. They know where the shoe pinches. So I think those will be very interesting conversations. And then the broader Flourish Ventures family. I'll talk about Flourish in the next slide. But yeah, you'll have access to Madica, the Madica team, Flourish team, and a whole range of people in our community. Another thing we'll be doing is, as part of our program, we'll be supporting the companies for a period of 12 to 18 months. And this will not be in anything sort of like a cohort, sort of like support. So it's individual. So you come with your company, we sit down, make a support plan for the 12 to 18 months. What are the milestones you're trying to achieve? And then for us, then it will be figuring out how do we rally resources to help you achieve those plans. So whether it's introduction to customers, introduction to investors, mentors, whatever it is that you need. And then we also have credits, just the usual perks, whether it's AWS credits, whether it's having discounts to people who are doing, say, recruiting and things like those. Yeah, and then in terms of continuity at the very end, you always, as an entrepreneur, you'll be looking to raise more capital. So we'll also be doing introductions to people in our network for that. Cool. So who is Madica for? So first of all, we're looking for local founders with diverse teams, and this is across the continent. And as I mentioned, the 4 countries that get a lot of funding, we're not very keen on those. So focused on other countries outside of that, like Uganda. So if you're a local Ugandan founder, we're keen on you. And then in terms of sectors, we're sector agnostic, so we are not keen on any sector. Cool. So this is the journey that has led to Madica. So if you can take a step back, Madica, Flourish, and all those other people on that screen are part of the Omedia network. So it just started with Pierre Omedia. Do we all know who Pierre Omedia is? eBay. Yeah? Yes. So Pierre was one of the co-founders of eBay, and eBay is the company that acquired PayPal and a couple of other companies. So he made tons of money, like became a dollar billionaire and all that. And then he decided to invest his money. So there's the grant making aspect of the business, and then there's the investment making part of the business. So as part of the grant making part of the business, the Omedia network was one of the first people to actually write a check for like iHub, if you're familiar with iHub, to be set up in Nairobi, CC Hub to be set up in Lagos. And they've gone on to invest in like other people like Andela and Bridge Academies. And then out of that, there was a need to sort of like focus on financial wellness, and that's where Flourish was born. So Flourish just focuses on investments in the financial health sector. So part of like the companies in that, in the portfolio for Flourish, companies like Paga, Flutterwave, Apollo Agriculture, Azuna, and a couple others. And so post that, if you remember the slide I just talked about where a lot of funding is going to the 4 countries, a lot of mail, a lot of fintech, a lot of like, you know, people who schooled abroad. That is just how like the Flourish portfolio looks like. And so then the Flourish team sat down and thought, you know, we need to do something to make sure that we are actually making impactful, you know, change on the African continent. And so that's how Madica was born. And I will be telling you all about it. So thank you for engaging me. I know I've met a couple of you who've applied. So I look forward to answering any questions. In case you're curious how application looks like, just go to www.madica.vc/apply. It's a very easy form. She'll take you like maybe 10 minutes. Thank you.
How is everyone doing? Am I audible enough? I'm just happy to be here. This is actually a bigger turnout than we had when we were launching the new capital, so that's sort of an achievement.
Thank you, Kampala. Kampala is my third home.
So, yeah, I think Kampala loves you a little bit more than they love me. So yeah, so for this session we are just going to Brenda has presented what Madica is all about and what Madica is trying to achieve in the market. But for this session, we're just going to probably go a little bit deeper because the presentation cannot cover everything. So we want to focus on those aspects that the presentation did not cover. So I'll ask Brenda a few questions, just maybe 5 questions, and then we will open it up to the rest of the audience because I know if people here really have some questions that they want to ask. First of all, it's great that we are having Madica concentrating on the other markets. If you ever do venture capital analysis and you're doing it from this part of the world, it gets a little bit depressing for you to keep on doing analysis and you're seeing Kenya, you're seeing South Africa, you're seeing Egypt, you're seeing Nigeria, and then Uganda is a footnote somewhere. So it's a little bit depressing, but obviously the fact that they are concentrating on markets like this, on women, and also on locally educated founders, locally born and educated founders, I think that's I don't think we give them I don't think we give them enough applause. Okay, so I'm just going to kick off my questions. Brenda, you mentioned that you're writing SafeNets of up to 200K. One thing is that people may not actually be familiar with what you mean by a SafeNet. So I think it's important that you provide more context around it.
Yeah. Okay, so are we all familiar with the different instruments that investors use to invest? Yeah? Yes, no? Yeah? How many yeses? So I can't even see. Okay, I've just seen one hand. So investors have different instruments that they use to invest. And I think the most popular one is usually equity, which is just like the typical one, like shares, where someone gives you money and they take certain shares in your company. So that's equity. And then there's debt, which is just like a loan, where it couldn't convert into equity at some point. So that's what you'll call convertible debt. So I think the terms for that usually will vary from funder to funder. And then there's a safe note, which is usually, it's a term that was made popular by Y Combinator, and it stands for Simple Agreement for Future Equity. So usually when a company is really young, the valuation tends to be really low. And a lot of companies, I think even Jonathan, in your experiences, you might have seen a lot of the companies in the really early stage, they'll give away huge percentages of equity for like little amounts of money. Like, I think the entrepreneur then doesn't think it's little, but when your company now raises a significant chunk of money and you realize like how much equity you lost to like earlier investors, then a lot of founders are not usually happy. So the safe note was introduced to sort of be something that remedies this. So it's usually most of the time founder-friendly terms. We'll agree on the valuation. What time in the future do we want to, consider that our investment then will be, turned into equity or whatever it is that you're doing. So most of the things you need to consider about, like a safe note would be, first of all, is valuation. I think valuation usually it's more of an art, not a science. It varies from company to company, sector to sector, depending whether you're doing software or hardware. But I think whatever instrument it is that you consider, make sure that you're very aware of like what is in it for you as a founder, but also what is it in it for the investor. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs that I've interacted with don't understand how things on the other side work. You understand how a company works, but you don't understand how venture capital firms run. So if I can just do like 2 minutes of how venture capital firms run, a lot of the time venture capital funds will get money from other people to come and invest. So these are what we call LPs or limited partners. So it could be high net worth individuals, could be pension funds, like whatever it is. And all these people have different expectations of their money. There's someone who, if my money is times 5, I'm fine. Someone who is like times 500, I'm fine. So I think knowing how things work on the other end will help a lot of entrepreneurs just know that out of all those options that we usually have there, a safe note is most of the time what is meant to make sure that your interests as an entrepreneur are safeguarded.
Yeah. By the way, I write a LinkedIn newsletter called Investor Notes for Founders, where I try to break down funding and funding terms and all these things, these terminologies for founders who may never get a chance to understand these terms. So in case you use LinkedIn, you should just check my LinkedIn page and you can be able to subscribe. So to just sort of move the conversation further forward, you did talk about how you don't do like a cohort, it's on rolling basis. Is there like any logic to doing this?
Yeah. So how Madica is structured, I think we're borrowing from like the best of two worlds. So best of the accelerator world and also best of like the VC world. And a lot of like my career, last 5 years, spent working in the accelerator space. And a lot of like the accelerators will run, you're a cohort of 10 companies, you get support for like 3 to 6 months. But for us, we are providing support for 12 to 18 months. And I think if you do like bigger, like if you do support where you have to maintain a lot of things equal, so like if you have 12 companies and you want this 12 companies to get the same amount of support, if you have to do it for 12 to 18 months, that would be a very expensive program. Okay. So for us, we care about the founder and what their dreams are. And so that's why everything is custom made to every founder and not, so we'll have a few things that are, cohort based, not really cohort, but like bring the portfolio together. But a lot of the support will be based on like the specific needs of the company. So that's like the VC side, of the world, where a lot of support, like a lot of portfolio support, is just based on your needs. Are you looking to hire, say, like a CMO, and you have never hired a CMO? That's something specific that will support you on. But then another company comes and they've never hired a CTO, so you see the support there will vary, and so that's why we custom made.
I think that approach probably works better for our markets. We've been able to see some of these things when we speak to founders, and we also do offer some venture building support, so it's something that we are a little bit familiar with. I think also when you talked about the application process, because I've talked to some founders here who have applied, and some have told me they're on stage 1, others have told me they're on stage 2. So I think if it would be great that you can offer an insight into what the application process is like, and obviously what the criteria is when you're picking these founders.
Yeah. So stage 1, so I think one of the first things we try to do at Madica is to make sure that our application process is really accessible and very easy for founders to go through. And so in stage 1, we have like a short application that is just like 10 minutes, should take maybe 10 minutes to fill. And so for that first one, we'll just be sort of like filtering out for the things that I mentioned we care about. Whether it is a sector that is very interesting, what are the dynamics of like, your founding team, are there any female co-founders, there is even like the mix, because a lot of teams we've also seen have like local and expat founders, so also what's a mix in that. So stage 1, once you're done with stage 1, the next stage, stage 2 is where we deep dive into like now your company. I think the application then should take like maybe 30 or an hour to do if you have your documents right. But if you don't, it should take longer than that. And this is where, we'll deep dive into now, if you talked about like, say, your company and, your shareholding, we'll want to know a little bit more about that. If you said you have fundraised, where you fundraised from, what are the terms of like all this. So once you're done with stage 2, then the next stage is due diligence, and this is where, the rubber meets the road. So a lot of people will do big talk, we have 10,000 users, okay. Then I will come and want, what is the data? Show us your 10,000 users, what is your interaction with them? What do they even say about you? So this is the time we'll want to talk to your, your customers, your suppliers. If you have other investors, it's the time we also want to talk to them. And also just people in the ecosystem who can give professional recommendations on like, what is your character as a founder? Are you teachable? Because that's one of the things that we're really big on. Because running a startup is not easy and you'll need to pivot so many times. But so if you're just stuck on your idea being a certain way, then, this is the time, we also realize that you may not be a good fit. And then post that, compile an investment memo, and we go present it to the IC, sort of like what is Emmanuel is doing in that small room. There's a company that, has reached that stage. And so IC is where we also give the founders an opportunity to come meet people from our board, and they'll pitch the company. If the board has any questions, ask them, and and then we make a decision whether you're investing or not. But then in between that, we're also keen to work with other investors who are either interested in the sector or like market that you're working in, because the funding that we offer is up to 200K. So if a company, say, is looking to raise 500K, then are there other funders that, you're talking to? So those are also the times that we look at like possible other VCs that we could co-invest with.
I think this is going to be my last question. When I look at what you're building and what Madica is all about, it sounds more like a venture studio, a little bit like a venture studio. And like criticism of venture studios has been the independence of these founders, because in so many cases you're providing, actually in some cases you're providing a large chunk of the funding, actually probably more than the investor is doing, more than the founder is doing for a startup at that stage. It's probably like an MVP. So how does the independence of the founder in the decision making and most of the key things that the founder wants to do, what is the independence like? Do you have a way that you mitigate some of this criticism?
So we are 100%, for the founder. So we don't take any board seats. But, as I mentioned, we screen also for like the character of the founder. So like, will you just take money and disappear? And we hear you've bought land and now you're running a resort in Ginger, so yeah, soft life. Yeah, Madica is not funding your soft life ambitions. So the founders were really looking to work with, people of integrity. So you get the money and you're doing like monthly investor, updates. Will we expect that, or do you go dark after a while? So we're not like trying to micromanage you, which is like, I think maybe other founders might say that they have been micromanaged by a fund, where they're like, what decision are you making today? No. For us, it's like, you're the founder, your country best, the sector that you're funding, you're creating your business in best. If you need support, which will be like, in terms of mentorship, tapping into like what we on our team know best, that will be provided. So with all these resources, like, we hope that you succeed, because, we are all rooting for you, and we are not like trying to be distracting you from like your work, making you go to like 100 conferences all the time. No, the best thing that you're good at is building this business. So we hope that the founders that we get will actually focus on that, and will be able to support them on that journey.
Yeah, I think founders have had. I personally, I think we could do with more programs like this, obviously. But since we don't have more like this, then we have to use what we have right now. And so I think that's...
But I think like what you have is amazing. Like, yeah, I think Ugandans don't give themselves credit for like the type of ecosystem that you have. Like, there's very few countries in Africa where you'll go and there's an innovation week, and it's actually run by like, organizations that have come together. Like, if you go to other countries, it's just like one government entity, and it looks like, if you go there, you can't go in your t-shirt, you need to go in your suits, because then you'll be meeting the old men who are running, ministries, but, making policies that are not really helping at the end of the day. But I think like, I've come for like, I think 2 innovation weeks. Okay, one was virtual, and then the other one was like, last year at my Steel, and meeting like young people who are able like to have the spaces where they can go and interact and know like your ideas are not like, like they could be crazy, but you're not crazy.
Definitely not.
Yeah, and there's a lot of spaces that are provided for that, and I think there's been like tons of advancements, even like with the local hubs, even what we have here, collaborating and even coming up with innovative models to support entrepreneurs. Even people like Founders Hub and, Founders Lounge starting, and, they're being given space by Startup. Like, how many other countries can you go and say that people work that closely? It's not a lot. And I've worked with like, maybe ESOs from like maybe 30 or so countries on the continent, and things are rough out there. So I think there are things worth celebrating here that a lot of you don't give yourself credit for. It's like if someone wrongs you and then you want them to apologize, now they're looking at you as like, I was not wrong. So when you get like that same sort of attitude from founders, it's sort of like, can be a red flag.
So what kind of investor Madica is?
So before I go to that one, the other thing is, another mistake is, maybe I would call boiling the ocean, when you ask a company what they're good at and they give you a list of 50 things. And you're like, I thought you're trying to build like, a solution for like, I think like school-going children. And then now they just give you this list of other million things that they do. So that's usually a red flag. And it can just be like, yeah, you don't know where your focus is. What was that question?
What kind of investor Madica is? When things are rosy, or you're
what kind of investor is Madica? So we come really, really early stage when things are messy. Most of the time there's no structure. And one of the things we're actually big on, which is to answer like your last question, is governance, which a lot of companies don't think from the get-go. Like, whether it's getting a board or an advisory board, or just like this formalized, like group of people who advise your business, is something I've not seen, but it's something that we're also really big on. So at the very stage when now you start even taking on foreign capital, say from like the US, and people ask you to be, say, incorporated in Delaware, those are things that, we'll find people to sort of like advise you on such things. So again, it depends on like the needs of the company.
And lastly, do you help with follow-on funding?
Oh yeah, follow-on funding, yes. Yes, we do, you know. We'll introduce you to the Bethel capitals of the world, and the Renew capitals, and the Future Africa, and even like, you know, other bigger funds, depending on like what your interests are as a founder.
Those 5 years, certainly you had a co-founder who at 2 years felt disinterested and had to do nothing, but they were already maybe like 30% or even 50% of the company, and you're already struggling at that stage, or you find that you are just a single founder anyway. So I would like that you unpack for us, how should that shock absorbing journey look like for founders who are in that profile? Maybe secondly could be then for anyone who is just at their phase of beginning or starting, how should they structure, how should they prepare themselves for funding of maybe just after 1 year, they raise maybe $1 million.
I think something else that is not talked a lot about is solo founders, because I think there's some people who view that as a risk, you know, because there's a key man risk there, because it's just one person running the company. So even if you're 1, you're 2, I think it doesn't really matter. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that you have a solid team, whether you have a co-founder or not, because whether it's a grant funder giving money as a hub or an investor giving you money as a startup, that's the one thing that a lot of people really pay attention to at the very early stage. So do people on your team have complementary skill sets? So if you're doing like a tech product, is everyone on your team like a techie and you have like no one doing sales or even no one who understands sales? So just making sure that you have a right balance of skill sets. I think something else when it comes to team is people who have lived experience of the problem that they're trying to solve. So problems are different to different people. There's someone who will feel thirsty and they want to drink bottled water. And there's someone who will feel thirsty and they want to drink like tap Roma water. I think I met an entrepreneur who's creating like a solution around that. And yeah, so when you think about what your problem is, do you have an experience with it? Can you articulate it properly and know like why is it that your customer needs the solution that you're creating? So I think for a hub, you know, are you creating something that the entrepreneurs need? Or is it something that you think the entrepreneurs need? So there needs to be a feedback loop there between the hub and the startup. And on the other end, also on the company side, there needs to be a feedback loop between the customers and the team that is actually creating this product. Because you will see that you might start with like, you know, product that looks like, you know, something very simple, and whatever you end up iterating ends up being more complex. But at the end of the day, you need to communicate it in very simple terms to whoever will be using it. So it's not like one size fits all. You need to create like a solution based on like the needs of your customer.
My question would be on the feedback loop that is services, and if someone fails during the application because their wording of their solution is not clear, is there a way that that person can be met in person and allowed to speak about their ideas the best way they know how
some
to?
Founders, there are a couple of requirements for these venture capital calls and other funding calls, but you realize that very many startups may not even meet all the requirements, but what they're doing is very ideal and is very promising and has potential. But because maybe the markets they're in are not adapting to what they're doing, but their startups have potential in other markets. And when it comes to doing things like due diligence, they may not meet the numbers of the impact in their economies, but their startups and what they're doing is ideal. So I want to ask on behalf of them, does Madica consider the impact and what is the startup doing? And even when they may not meet, you know, very many numbers in their economies, but what happens if they scale and they compete globally, internationally? Then on the part for requirements, when you look at, there may be 15 requirements, but a startup is only having maybe 7. And the idea is ideal. Does Madica put that in consideration based on what the startup is trying to do? Thank you.
You know, we have had very many venture capitalists coming on stage, but on the African continent, it's still a big challenge for a startup still at an MVP stage to lead access funding. And I really want to understand what kind of uniqueness are you guys coming on board with to be able to accommodate these startups or these founders, because there are too many on the continent. And actually, we've seen cases where most entrepreneurs who are in the informal sector, I would say, who just run their businesses, are the ones that could meet your requirements, even though they don't have all these papers and stuff like, you know, what they're always looking for. So I would like to really understand what kind of, stage or platform you're giving to these people to really be able to be accommodated on the platform. And then you mentioned about 12 to 18 months journey that you take up with this entrepreneur who's, you know, looking forward to have funding from the platform. But is that a timeline? Is that a minimum timeline that a startup would be able to spend with you so that they'd be able to access funding? That's one thing that I would like to really understand very well. And alongside that, Jan, because you say you don't run like a cohort-based something, but I don't know, you mentioned 10 mentors. Do you think they're enough? I don't know whether you really have done that calculation of how many people will be signing up on the platform. Would they really be getting that required support?
When you're looking for, the 50K, 100K, once you go to the millions, there's usually a lot of capital there. But the reality is, like, when you're looking for the smaller ticket sizes, that you're a really risky startup. So someone needs to come in and de-risk you, and that's where Madica comes in. And so all the things that, would be red flags for other investors are the things that we're willing to work with you and hold your hand through the 12 to 18 months. And yes, you need, to have like a plan, like milestones you're trying to achieve in this 12 to 18 months in order to access the capital. Because otherwise, like, we're giving you money and you have no plan. It's like, pouring money down the drain. There needs to be like a plan. What are you trying to do with your business? And then now we rally resources around that. And so the 10 mentors that I mentioned are actually people we'll be calling lead mentors. So you'll have access to like tons of other mentors from across the continent, working with other entrepreneurial support organizations like StartHub, who will be able to, hold your hand when it comes to like, are there like country-specific things that you're struggling with, and they're able to offer support in such things. But for the 10 mentors that we'll be working with are people who will walk with you the journey. So they'll, if you want to prep, how do I prep for a board meeting? The people who will be talking to you that, I have never done like maybe a presentation at an IC. These are people who are going to hold your hand through such things. Because I think there are things as a founder that another founder can't really help you with. You need to talk to someone who's more experienced and most probably has gone through, maybe a similar experience, whether it's pitching to a corporate, like how do you make, those deals where say you're speaking to like MTN, you have a subscription service. You're charging, say, 500 UGX, and maybe 90% goes to MTN, so you're only making like 10%. How do you handle such negotiations? So those are the caliber of mentors that we're bringing on board to hold your hand throughout the journey.
Yeah, I think you've answered the big four and when the capital is dispersed. I think those were his key questions, and then you also mentioned about how you fund startups at the MVP stage. I think he wanted to know. Because his question was, there are not a lot of investors funding startups at the MVP stage. So he was just wondering what's unique about Madica.
Yeah. So Madica is spun out of Flourish Ventures, which does more bigger ticket sizes. But for us, this is where we're going where the need is. So I mentioned like people struggle when you need your 50K, your 100K, your 200K. But I think once you're like past the 1 million threshold, there's so many people willing, to almost throw money at you because people have money that they want to invest. But the companies that they get are very risky. So who does the de-risking? And it's either like, you go through a hub program and then they introduce you to an investor and the hub has, a certain amount of shares that they have invested or it's vesting and something of the sort. But they're just, as an investor, when you're looking at companies, especially at the early stage, all you're thinking about is like, where is the risk and how do you mitigate? And if it's something that is beyond you, maybe it's like police in a country, that will be people who give you like the bigger ticket sizes that, would focus on that. But then we have organizations like, Startup Uganda, who focus on like the policy side of things. So that's what we've worked with. And, if there comes to like things that you're facing as a company and it's like the big stuff like policy, hope to collaborate with people like those to support you on that journey.
Yeah. And he was asking, does Madica consider founders who are not accepted in their home country? So let me say he's building in Uganda and his product is not accepted here, but he has the potential to scale to other markets.
Yeah, I think when you look across Africa, there are a lot of like smaller markets. And I think an example I would even use to compare Uganda is like when you look at Zambia. Zambia is like such a tiny market, but there are associations or like, that exist that help entrepreneurs expand to Malawi and Zimbabwe. So when you're looking at a market, then you'll be looking at a block and not like a single sort of like country. So if you feel like, Uganda is a small market for you, then what other countries are there that exist on the continent that would be easy for you to expand on? So that also, would raise your valuation.
Yeah. And then Sandra asked a very interesting question. She was basically saying she struggles with storytelling, with articulating her product, her startup, maybe the problem they're solving and the solution. And she asked if you have maybe one-on-one sessions with these founders where they can, instead of writing, they can just explain. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Sandra. Very difficult. Yeah, at times I also struggle with storytelling, so I relate. So as part of our application process, I think there's a place where we give you an option to upload, whether it's videos, whatever type of content that you have that helps explain your product and what you're doing. So that could be one avenue. In terms of like one-to-one meetings, this will be mostly it. So if you struggle to express yourself on paper, then it will be, come to one of our mixers, talk to us, but also we're very available. Like send us a message on like, hello@madica.vc and someone on the team will get back to you. But also we have our in-house guru, Rose, who when you become part of the portfolio will be helping you sort of like figure out how to tell your stories better.
Yeah. Those are the questions we had. I don't know if you're taking another round of questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your Q&A. I only have one last question though. My question is, given the current state of the economy, most of our clients prefer to transact in cash, so it's a cash economy. And my question then becomes when you ask for like a data room and you want to track all that data, but most of it is cash transactions, how then will you be able to verify and validate the data when we come to you and say that whereas we have this much data, the majority of our transactions are actually cash-based? Thank you.
That is a very difficult question. Do you want to take it offline? So one of the things, so imagine like people who crowdfund and you get like 50 million sort of like giving you, however amount of money they give you and they get like a small percent, then that will be like a very congested cap table. But then if you look at people who maybe have like, whether you worked maybe at a research institute, and this is like an institute, I've worked with like government institutions here, and trust me, getting a signature is a lot of work. So you imagine you have like those set of institutions on your cap table, and you need like to get something signed off. For us, it could be a very easy process, but then it could be a very difficult thing for you. So whoever you have on your cap table, make sure they make your life easier when it's either buying them out or they want, people want to be diluted, things like those. Just make sure it's in your favor and it can be easy for you.
All right, thank you very much. I guess that's a wrap for the session. Okay. All right, one round of applause. Thank you.